All right, welcome everybody back to our Brooklyn Raga Massive weekly sessions. The past month of October, we featured a big discussion around caste dynamics, particularly as it relates to South Indian percussion. Um, so it's great now that we have a Indian percussionist with us, Rohan Krishnamurthy. Um, Thank you so much for being with us. Brooklyn Raga Massive, of course, is a collective of musicians who are inspired by or deeply into the classical music of South Asia and the raga music and percussion. And we used to have weekly jam sessions and concerts, only interrupted by COVID times. Now we are back to a monthly. We are doing our jam session back and other concerts back in public. But we, over the course of the pandemic, we switched to this online format, and we've gotten a lot out of it, having great conversations with musicians and artists in their living rooms or studios, so we can really get to know them intimately. Um, if you would like to donate to BRM so we can put on more of these, I'll drop that in the chat. If you have any questions for Rohan over the course of the evening, please drop that in the YouTube chat as well, or just shout out. Let us know how you're doing, how you're enjoying it. And Rohan, it's so great to have you with us. I think we've presented you live in concerts maybe a few times, right, over the years.
Yeah, at least several times that I can think of in the last several years. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Rohan is beaming to us from San Francisco Bay Area, and so great to have you with us. First of all, I just want to ask you how you've been faring through the pandemic, and I mean now not over, but just some question I've been asking all the artists we talk to.
So first off, namaskaram, good evening to everyone who's watching tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. A huge thanks to BRM, Neil, Arun, everyone in the BRM family for inviting me to present this. I've known BRM, I've been part of the BRM community for a very long time, and super happy to share some of these things that I've been working on, kind of at the intersection of carnatic music and jazz, funk, and especially bridging carnatic rhythms with the drum set. So yeah, to your question, Neil, how's it been going for the last year and a half? It feels like it's all a blur at this point, but it was, I mean, the challenges are obvious. I don't even want to get into all of those. So I think it's affected all of us artists.
Maybe the bigger thing is how, or the more important thing, relevant thing is how has your music changed or been affected by?
Sure, yeah. So, I try to focus on the positive as much as possible, and I think the pandemic really did force me to, of course, rethink a lot of things about performance and artistic creation. I actually was able to build a home studio because there were all these types of live stream events and recording that were happening. So, a lot of things that were sort of on the back burner for a very long time. Suddenly, it was something that I was actually able to find time to pursue. Artistically, from a creative standpoint, it's been different. I think that's maybe the best way I can put it. Again, this was unlike any other time in my life. I sort of joke that like I think I haven't been in one place for this long since I was probably 8 years old. Right, so many of us are used to performing and traveling. That's just kind of what we do. And for the last year and a half plus, there's been virtually none of that. Things have very recently kind of opened up very quickly. I've done several shows now out of town, including one coming up this weekend in Chicago for the Chicago World Music Festival. But it's sort of the new norm. Things are feeling like they're kind of getting back to normal, but still doesn't quite feel like we're there yet. But it's definitely given me a lot of time to think about what I do artistically, the larger sort of context of what I'm doing, and also the community that I'm a part of, and the community that I want to be a part of, and how to keep in touch with all these folks. So one thing for sure is we all had a lot of time to sit in front of Zoom and our computers and phones to sort of connect to people. So there was always these questions about, okay, how can I connect to the people I want to connect with, and what can we do? How can we stay connected through all of this? So in some ways, it's actually created a lot of new kind of like sort of ideas and new offerings for me. One thing I was working on with a friend of mine who now lives in Spain, Ryan Andrews, a good friend of mine, a producer. So some of these tracks that are kind of at the intersection of carnatic percussion and electronics, and even kind of trailer music, that kind of space. So just viewing connections in as many ways as possible, and trying to create. I think the main thing for me is I was trying to stay as creative as possible under the circumstances. And of course, there's just this huge sort of weight bearing down on you through the pandemic, not knowing when it's going to end and all that. But also trying to see, okay, well, if I have this time, and hopefully if I'm healthy through all of it, what can I do? What can I practice? What can I create? And how can I try to stay connected? So it's led to a lot of new sort of offerings, and a lot of offerings that have been sort of in the back burner for a long time for me. And certainly a lot of time to practice on the hybrid kit. So that's there's plenty of downtime to practice. So that's definitely I think one of the benefits of all this time at home.
Right, and we're seeing this hybrid kit right here. It's so exciting. Has this been something you've been developing for a long time?
Yeah, it's been many years in the making, and there's lots to talk about it. There's also a handout. I think you shared the link on the YouTube comments. So the handout has lots of info about everything I'll be talking about today, and a lot of technical sort of details, like how the carnatic percussion and the drums come together, all the different sort of musical, cultural things to consider when you're putting it together. But maybe I should just start off by playing a little bit. So
sure.
The best way to kind of explain what's going on here is to just give you a little demo of all the different sort of parts. So here we go. We'll do a little bit of playing, and then talk more about it. Tak dum din nam kita taka din tam din tam kita taka din ta taka din tam kita taka din ta din tam kita taka din taka din ta din tam kita taka din taka din get the taka dun dun taka dun dun taka 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 dun ta da dun dun taka dun taka dun 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 ta dun dun taka dun taka dun ta ta dun ta 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 dun ta ta dun taka dun taka dun taka dun ta ta dun ta 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 dun ta 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 dun taka dun taka dun ta ta dun ta 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 taka dun dun ta ta dun takita 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 dun takita dun takita takita dun takita 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 dun kadun takun 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 dun takun kadun takun takita 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 dun takun takita takita dun takun takun takita takita dun takun dun takun takita dun takun takita takita dun
Yeah, va. Kya baat hai. So nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So great.
So, thank you. Yeah, and there's again a lot to talk about the hybrid kit, about what's going on musically and culturally, how these different elements are coming together. Of course, I'm beaming into you from Oakland, California, here in my home studio, so you're getting a fairly modest audio and video kind of experience, the best that I can do here. But we do have some videos to play as well, where we actually get to see some close-ups of all the different types of things that are doing around the kit, and you'll also be able to hear everything a lot better. And all the links for all of those videos. And there's also actually an article, interview I did for Percussive Notes about the hybrid kit, and all that stuff is in the handout, in the link that's provided in the comments. So you can check all those things out as well.
Yeah, why don't you just go get into your presentation? Go keep going, with your.
Yeah, sure. So the hybrid kit, it comes down to this whole idea of cultural hybridity, right? The mixing of different elements, and this is very much a direct result of globalization, immigration, diaspora, the interaction between different communities, and the idea of taking root in a new context. So I know this is something that's very very central to BRM and so many artists and audiences in the BRM community. Many of us are straddling these different worlds, South Asian spheres, the first, second, sometimes third generation American spheres. So and mixing that with other sort of communities, cultural communities that we're a part of and exposed to. So what I'm interested in this presentation is thinking about how we can translate the sounds, the concepts, the aesthetics, the groove, the improv, the improvisation, and the feel of carnatic rhythm to the drum set. And the way that I'd like to sort of do that is to take a nuanced and kind of culturally responsive approach to adapting Indian rhythm to the kit. The idea of sort of remaining humble to learn and appreciate the full diversity of Indian rhythm and the history, the culture, and the people behind each tradition. When you're mixing traditions that are this rich, the drum set, an instrument like the mridangam or the khanjira, the konakol, the vocal percussion, the garam, each of these traditions, I think it's important for us to sort of remember, has its own sort of history, and there's many divergent histories. They're untold histories. So the more I think we learn about these different traditions, instruments, lineages, the more we learn about that, the better we can kind of integrate these different elements into this new sort of hybrid setup. And again, I'm talking specifically about the Carnatic hybrid kit, that is incorporating Carnatic percussion into the drum set. But there's a lot of this type of hybridity happening in many other sort of spheres with different instruments, with electronics, and of course even other traditions outside of South Asian traditions. So this is something I think that'll hopefully resonate with a lot of folks. And the idea of integrating, how can we integrate these things in a harmonious way, so we can actually sort of understand what all the parts are and actually kind of traverse them and bring them together harmoniously. There's been a lot of attempts and efforts to sort of adapt fixed Indian rhythmic compositions onto the drum set, and that's a huge topic in and of itself. I'm actually not even going to go into that today. Taking these korvais, moras in the Hindustani world, the tihais, chakradars, these types of compositions and mapping them onto the drums. And that's a huge topic, and there are many wonderful artists who are working on that. I'm sort of interested, in addition to that, I'm also interested in, again, seeing how to achieve the feel, the groove, and the improvisational creativity. So, what is it about the essence of carnatic rhythm and carnatic music? What is it about the feel and the groove and the improvisational approach, and how can we apply that to the drums and to the hybrid kit? So as I mentioned, the hybrid kit that I have here is specific to carnatic percussion. You have the mridangam here, which most of you are probably familiar with, the khanjira. I did some vocal percussion, the conical at the beginning, the solo, and then you have kind of the standard drum set parts, the snare drum, the hi-hat, the cymbals, and there's a bass drum which you can't see, but hopefully you can hear. But again, you can sort of hybridize any number of instruments and electronics at this point into a hybrid kit setting. The idea is that you should be able to customize the hybrid kit to your context and to be able to integrate elements as best as you can. So you really have to kind of understand what context are you playing in, and sort of be flexible about that. Most of us are not typically performing just one thing all the time. We're playing with different people, different contexts, different spaces. Some spaces are super loud. I'm actually in my home studio here, and I have a setup here where I'm trying to keep everything as balanced as possible. Nothing is amplified, right? So I'm trying to make sure that the cymbals, for example, aren't too loud. So I'm using specific cymbals for that. I'm playing in a specific way so you can hopefully hear everything in a balanced way. So just thinking sort of like flexibly. Okay, what context are we playing in, and what type of elements do we need for that?
That's always been the toughest part I've found of playing with other instruments, playing with drum set. I myself am a sitar player and play a lot with tabla players, but the Indian instruments are generally much quieter than Western instruments.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a big point that I'll get to. The idea of the hybrid kit is that you can play traditional drum set textures, with your strong backbeats, deep bass drums, splashy cymbals, crisp hi-hats. All of the standard sort of sounds of the drum set are available to you, depending on the context that you're playing in. But you can also reinterpret them in unique and distinct ways, depending on which elements you've sort of hybridized and what context you're playing in. You can create, in addition to playing sort of existing traditional sounds and textures, you can also create completely new grooves, fills, and sort of sonic spaces that can fit different contexts. So it's like you have existing sort of languages, musical languages that you can speak, assuming you spent some time to learn those languages. But you're also now mixing these languages in a way that allow you to say new things, things that you couldn't necessarily say in just one language or the other. They're really creating kind of a hybrid language. Another sort of interesting idea is adapting the phrasing of say carnatic rhythm to the drums. So taking the way that you play a certain rhythm on say mridangam, the way you phrase that, and actually mapping that to the drum set. So these are again very nuanced types of things. So these are sort of like very deeper level things that many audience members may not even realize are going on, but there's that level of integration that's possible when you start mixing these things and truly think about integrating them. The conical vocal percussion I think is a very powerful way to incorporate some of these ideas, the repertoire, the aesthetics of Indian rhythm to the kit without any additional instruments. So you could have your completely standard drum set, but incorporate many of these ideas and these feels using the conical, if you learn that language, which truly is a drum language. The hybrid kit also sort of allows you to develop a greater finger, hand, stick, and feet independence and coordination. So this is something drummers are always obsessed about, these coordination and four limb coordination between your hands and your feet. And the Indian split finger technique in particular, where you use all your fingers in these different formations to create these different tones, particularly on the mridangam, tabla, khanjira, garam, these hand drums, takes this kind of coordination thing to a completely new level, where you can start mixing things like a stick on the ride cymbal and your middle and index fingers on the snare drum with your left hand and things like that. So very, very interesting new kind of combinations, which are very challenging, and and again, there's a whole. I'm not going to get into specific exercises and stuff to learn these things. That sort of we can save that for another workshop or something. But it's a truly sort of new experience when you start mixing this level of coordination and independence. Now, to your point, Neil, I think one of the big sort of like challenges, maybe one of the sort of like fundamental reasons I even started thinking about a hybrid kit, actually it came down to this idea of just the volume, right? The volume levels of Indian percussion, hand drumming, and drum set. So carnatic percussion, is my first musical language. I started learning the mridangam when I was 8 years old in Kalamazoo, Michigan, of all places. There happened to be a teacher in town, and this was my first musical language. But of course, I was also exposed to a lot of different genres and styles of music. And by high school, I started learning piano, drum set, some jazz, classical genres. And I was also getting the opportunity to start performing Indian percussion, carnatic percussion with some drummers, with some drum set players. So very early on, I realized that there's a lot that needs to be done if we're going to be able to play harmoniously, right? Because the one loud crash cymbal could completely drown out like 20 seconds of of intricate things that are happening on the mridangam, for example. So I was really thinking from really high school onwards, how can we create a perfectly sort of balanced sound between the drums, which are such a fundamental part of so many styles of music, and carnatic percussion. And I should add that one of the concepts I have when I'm playing the hybrid kit is that of a single player, single artist creating this integrated sound between drums and percussion where all parts are perfectly balanced, right? So you can think, when you're playing all these elements, you can think, okay, well, if I'm playing a stick on the ride and I'm doing this split finger thing on the snare, like how loud does the ride need to be if I'm trying to bring out this kind of activity on the left hand? Or you have feet. So if you're playing two hands on the mridangam, how loud do the feet need to be so we can create this new texture? And what are the sort of what are the different parts that are happening, and what needs to be foregrounded, what needs to be backgrounded? And you can really think at a very, very nuanced level about that. So again, it's in theory something a drummer and an Indian percussionist could do, but it requires that a lot of sort of mutual understanding of each other's languages, a lot of practice, and still there's no, it's impossible to read someone else's mind. So, and even when things are amplified, there's many contexts where the drums again tend to completely kind of wash out the Indian percussion. So this is a way to really kind of like fine tune that drums, that integrated drums and percussion sound, so you hear exactly what you're trying to bring out. So that's definitely an important part of it. And this idea of the hybrid kit, is and sort of hybridity is actually also very central to the history of the drums, the drum set as an instrument, right? So we often talk about in the drumming world how basically every part of the drum set comes from a different part of the world. So the cymbals come from the Middle East, the snare, the bass drum come from the European, marching band tradition. The toms, are coming from different parts of the world. So the bass drum pedal was invented in Germany. So all these parts, are coming from different parts of the world. But it was only in America where they all sort of came together, and American artists, particularly from the African American community, found ways to harmoniously play all of these different things in all of these different styles. So in a sense, I almost think of like the drum set as like a microcosm of American society, at least ideally what we would like American society to be, where all these different parts are there and coming together, and we're thinking about how can we harmoniously coexist and work interdependently. So again, that was as I started thinking about the drums as this truly kind of American instrument, I was always thinking then, well, how can we incorporate the carnatic percussion, Indian percussion, into this in that sort of deeply integrated way, and where does it fit into all of that? So you can see here in my hybrid kit, I have the mridangam where you would often find the snare, and I have the snare drum here to my left. So this gives me full access to the mridangam. It's mounted on a snare stand, so it gives me full access to both hands, and I'm also have access to my feet for the hi-hat and the bass drum, and still have access to the other parts. So this is one sort of setup that I have for the hybrid kit. I've also played, in certain situations where the mridangams actually, these two are just swapped. The snare and the mridangam are just swapped. So the snare is in the middle, the mridangam's on the side. So again, very context dependent. What I'm doing right now, what I'm demonstrating, what the next video that we'll be playing also sort of demonstrates, is this truly kind of integrated sound where you have, one hand on the mridangam, one stick, with the right hand, left hand on mridangam, the feet going. So truly hybrid kind of sound. There are other contexts where, you're playing more of a straight kind of Indian rhythmic texture at, in one sort of part of the music. Then you're playing more of a straight drum set, kind of whatever texture, jazz or pop texture in another part. So you're kind of going back and forth as opposed to, integrating it as much. So again, just depends on the context. And there are plenty of situations where I'm playing just a standard drum set and I'm actually expressing a lot of my ideas, Indian rhythmic ideas, on the khanjira and through the voice clinical. So this, of course, is an incredibly portable instrument that you can kind of take anywhere you go.
Khanjira is a drum set into itself. I mean, it's got all of everything.
It has everything. I mean, you can. I often think of the khanjira as like the sort of the easiest instrument to start on, to make some sounds on, but the hardest instrument to master. It's such a simple instrument, to get started. But you have to learn the technique to such a high level to be able to express all the ideas into and it's so intensive on your just one hand. So and speaking of sort of portability. With the hybrid kit, in terms of a performance standpoint, a lot of venues have, the standard drum set elements. So there are a lot of situations where I'm actually just traveling with my Indian percussion, and that's so it's a very portable kind of setup where you can create this hybrid thing with the instruments that the venues have. And there's also sort of this kind of visual thrill to watch like one person kind of balancing all these different elements. And I've had lots of audience members come at different times sort of just saying like, wow, like, what are you doing? What's your left hand doing? Because it's just like, it seems like there's so much stuff going on, and there is a lot of stuff going on. But it's just kind of, cool to see, one person thinking about so many different, musical parts at all times, and hopefully also thinking and listening and communicating with everyone else on stage as well. So those are some of the ideas, the musical, cultural sort of ideas and concepts that I'm thinking about when creating, the carnatic hybrid kit. Maybe we should play that video of Cycles. It's a short piece, original composition of mine with my Indo-jazz-funk ensemble, the Alaya Project, with Rohan Krishnamurthy on saxophone and Colin Hogan on keys and accordion. So this is the Alaya Project is an ensemble that is many, many, many years in the making, and it bridges the worlds of Carnatic music with contemporary jazz and funk, and is also sort of a way for me to express a lot of these hybrid kit ideas in a way that to sort of explore and express all the ideas of the hybrid kit that I may not be able to do in different settings. So Cycles is actually one of the first pieces I wrote for the group, and in this video you'll kind of see all the different things I'm doing, hands on snare, and then kind of traveling through the kit. And you'll get to see that and hear that sort of like up close, and also hear that in a full musical context with keys and sax.
Great. All right, here we go.
All right. Nice. Hopefully, you guys were able to hear that and see that pretty well. So, again,
Excellent.
thank you. Yeah, that's the Alaya Project. Myself, Krishnan on sax, and Colin Hogan on keys. Um,
It's
and
nice to see Prashant. We've presented him over the years too.
Yeah,
Is the
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Prashant and I go way back. I think we were talking about this. So we had a show recently, and I think we've been playing together for over almost 25 years, which is really, really hard to believe because we're not that old. But we met, in kind of like in grade school, middle school, and we grew up in Phoenix, and I was in Michigan, but we kept meeting at these different festivals and playing carnatic, concerts, and then in India and in Canada, and then um, and then we started working on some of these kind of intersectional Indo-jazz-funk types of things. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about that piece too. I won't get into the details, but hopefully you get to see and hear some of the things that the hyperkick can do in that context. And uh, yeah,
it's a 9-beat rhythm. Is that based on a specific tala, or is that something you made up?
I think yeah, I didn't think of it necessarily as an athala, but more just kind of that rhythm, that 9-beat rhythm, as you're saying, and it's also based on a raga called Gambhira Nate, so it has that uses primarily those notes, and sort of harmonically is also kind of traveling through the main sort of these notes in the raga. Yeah. So I also wanted to mention, actually I'm just looking at the time here. So there was one other clip I wanted to play, and I wanted to just sort of mention a few people before we watch the next clip. So of course, the foundation for everything that I'm doing. It goes back to my mridangam guru, Sri Guru Vardole. He's one of the senior masters based in Chennai. So I've had the opportunity to study with him for also over almost 25 years at this point. And I also have to give a huge shout out to my drum set teacher, Alan Hall, who I studied with at the California Jazz Conservatory here in Berkeley. And the hybrid kit really did come to life in his studio. I remember at least 6+ years ago, 7+ years ago, I had studied drum set in college, and I'd had these ideas, but I really sort of like really started growing it in his studio. And I remember step by step by step by step, we kind of started adding different elements, thinking about what, what's left foot doing, what's right foot doing, what sticks, we're using sticks, brushes. There's so many different choices. How do we conceptualize all this? So, huge shout out to Alan Hall for really kind of seeing this through from right from the creation, and for being very patient with all of my questions and all of my experimentation, many of which I look back now and sort of laugh at. But you have to kind of go through the process of trial and error when you're doing something new. And I also want to mention another, very close friend of mine, and a sort of core community member at BRM, and that's Rupa Mahadevan. So Rupa, huge congrats to her. She got married recently, and we all enjoyed attending her wedding here in the Bay. So the hybrid kit, I think I first really presented it and toured it with her. This was back in 2017. So she had a project called Rupa in Flux, and that was a truly crossover kind of project. And it just so we've known each other for a long time, but I didn't know about the project until much later. And by that point, I was tinkering with a lot of these hybrid kit ideas. And then we sort of connected about the project, and I started listening to the music. At the time, the original, I guess, band had Guy Mintus, who was on keys, also familiar to the BRM family, and Anjana Swaminathan was playing violin. And as we were, thinking about the music and playing through the music, I was like, wow, this needs hybrid kit like this, because every piece is crossing, this carnatic realm, this R&B realm, this jazz realm, this kind of, there's like a musical theater aspect to it. So it's like, wow, this is the perfect opportunity to really experiment with all these things. So huge shout out to her. We went on this Park Festival tour in India, which is an amazing experience back in 2017, and that was the first time I really kind of presented the hybrid kit, in a large public setting. At the time, I was also using a cajon. So instead of the bass drum, I was actually using a cajon. There's an ongoing joke about the cajon, which kept, making its way through different band members, and my cajon was never with me. It was always with Rupa or Anjana or Guy. It was someone else's apartment at all times, but it somehow made it to the gig. So that is actually another very, very versatile setup for any drummers who are watching this. All these elements with the cajon and a cajon bass drum pedal. So the cajon is an wonderful instrument in and of itself, and the bass drum pedal allows you to create a lot of the bass drum tones, and it serves as a throne. So very, very portable setup, and works perfectly with this kind of acoustic sort of soundscape. So that was the original version of the hybrid kit that I took on tour. And there's a couple of videos that links that I've shared in this handout. Maybe we can go ahead and sing a song. Maybe just play part of it. That piece also is absolutely this idea of cultural hybridity. The first part is a traditional Carnatic composition of Tilana by M. Krishna Kuduhulan. It's a famous Tilana, and then it morphs into this piece by the Carpenters called Sing a Song, and turns into this completely different kind of musical theater kind of sound. So you can see how even in the course of one song, all these different elements are put to work. So this recording actually, it was originally performed with Rupa and Flux and arranged by Guy, and this recording is a performance we did with Rupa and my band, the Alaya Project.
Excellent.
Pre-COVID.
brilliant. That was
Man,
fun.
I don't think I've seen that entire clip in a little while, but man, it brings back so many memories. What a performance! And I mean, we did a lot of shows in right before the pandemic, the Alaya Project, and wow, it really feels like a different time, a different world, or something like that. Pre-COVID.
How did that particular hybridity come about? Putting that song with.
Actually, I mean, I think it's a. I think it was one of Rupa's sort of like favorite songs growing up. I think her parents actually introduced her to it. They used to listen to the Carpenters, back then, and she just kind of grew up with that sound. And the Tilana is also that's kind of it's a fairly you could call it almost a carnatic standard
Mm,
by today's benchmarks. So it's a new piece. It's a relatively new piece from like maybe the 80s and 90s, but it's a very well known piece now. So and they kind of use similar kind of notes, scales, ragas, and feels. So I think that was a major.
right. Yes, I definitely noticed that.
So it
Yes.
doesn't feel like we're actually going somewhere that different, from a purely sort of like musical standpoint. But there's a lot of other things happening there. So yeah, so that just gives you another sort of idea of how the hybrid kit can help you traverse all these different aspects. Even in one kind of song, all these different elements. I have a bunch of things here in my handout about some of the technical aspects of like the hybrid kit, which I definitely encourage you guys to check it out if you're interested. I'm not going to get into any of the details right now. We're actually already running almost an hour here, but basically, I wanted to just kind of mention a few sort of things to consider. If you're putting your own hybrid kit together, whatever instrument it is, in the context of the drum set. Basically, one thing to sort of consider is like the feet, right? So, what are your feet doing with the hand drum? Usually, not typically thinking about feet, but so that there's many sort of options for your feet. One is a purely timekeeping kind of idea, where say the hi hat is on 1 and 3 or 2 and 4 kind of feel. And then there's the whole idea of the foot ostinato, basically where there's a repeating pattern happening in the feet. I give three sort of common examples: the four to the floor feet, which is just a simple kind of thing in any tempo. The samba feet, this kind of thing. And the biorhythm is also very common, the Brazilian biorhythm, which is used in many different contexts. Even to sing a song, rhythm is actually very closely related to that biorhythm. This kind of thing. So, idea of keeping the feet kind of constant, and then playing around with the hands. So that's another idea. There's also the idea of accenting the feet with what's happening in the hands. So, for example, like the khanjira, if you have like a low tone, every time you have a low tone, you double it with the bass drum, or you double it with the hi hat, or both. So that's an interesting kind of idea. So it's also very intricately related to the rhythms you're playing, but it just brings a completely new kind of sonic emphasis to it. And then there's the whole idea of kind of linear playing, where you're playing a different note with a different limb each time. So that's where you're kind of mixing all the things up, and your feet are like your hands are like your feet. You're mixing it all up. So that's just an idea about the feet. And then you probably saw it like in the videos in the hybrid kit solo. There's a lot of options with your hands, right? So one thing I really like to do, well, actually, even before you get into the hands, just the konnako, the vocal percussion plus feet is an incredible texture. There's all sorts of things you can do with that. And then the idea of using the Indian split finger technique on the snare drum is something I've really enjoyed. In the sing-a-song, you actually see me do quite a bit of that, especially at the beginning, playing a lot of Indian rhythms, or just using the technique to create all sorts of different sounds and possibilities on the snare drum. So there's incredible possibilities with that. And then you have the option of playing your hands on an instrument, 2 hands on the mridangam, 1 hand on the khanjira, 2 hands on the tabla, whatever it is, and have the feet going. And then you have the 1 hand, 1 stick feet possibility. So that's where it starts getting really interesting and really infinite, right? So 1 hand on the mridangam, left hand on rim click, or it's traveling like this, or right hand on with the stick on the cymbals, left hand on the mridangam, or left hand even traveling between, the left hand of the mridangam and the snare, these types of possibilities. And there's all sorts of combinations. Again, also sorts of possibility of different sticks with brushes, and lots of things to experiment with there. Drummers are especially interested in, again, this idea of independence and interdependence, and there's a lot of interesting things I've sort of explored about kind of cross, kind of interdependent things happening between, for example, left hand and right foot, these types of things, or right hand, left foot, these types of kind of cross, directional things happening. So there's a lot of interesting new possibilities there. And I think the most important thing is to kind of practice each combo separately, kind of think of it as its own voicing, its own texture, its own thing. Practice that, get comfortable with that, explore all the possibilities, and take the next combo, try to practice that, explore all the possibilities. And then ultimately try to create this flow between all of them. Now that you have all these different possibilities, in context, going from this to this, how do you make these kind of transitions? And, that flow is very, very important. I think in any context you're playing in, any tempo, any meter, anything, being able to go between the different combos based on what you're hearing and to try and express that. And again, most important thing, balance the dynamics. So usually in the hybrid kit setup, I usually have the hand percussion mic'd, or my voice might be mic'd. Sometimes drums will be mic'd, sometimes they won't. But really thinking very, very carefully about, again, you're in a certain context where right hand on rides, stick on the ride, left hand on the mridangam. Like what is the actual volume balance you're going for between like the gumki or the gamaka, like technique, with your left hand and the ride, right? Not just playing them, but like what is that balance? And what are you actually trying to say and express? So there's a lot, and it's a lot of trial and error. What I'm offering is just a work in progress. This is just some of the things that I've been exploring. There's an infinite possibilities, and I'm always excited to see what people kind of come up with and what different contexts they're creating their own hybrid kits and hybridizing the sounds. And I just hope to keep learning, keep working on things, and seeing what other people are coming up with as well.
I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you mentioned yet, but at what age did you start learning drum set?
So I started in, I guess, high school, and then through college. But I wasn't really thinking specifically about hybrid kit things until after college, and I seriously started developing it at the California Jazz Conservatory with Alan Hull. But I think maybe my first attempt at the hybrid kit was actually hands on snare. That seemed like a very immediate way of using the hand drumming technique, Indian hand drumming split finger technique, playing it on snare. And there's all sorts of things you can do that actually are very hard to play with sticks, but they feel very natural with the hands. So I think that's how I immediately started thinking about it. There was, of course, also the idea of how do we take a carnatic composition, a chord or whatever, and map it onto the drums. But for me, having studied both traditions, that was a little less interesting, actually. I mean, it's an amazing area of to explore, but I was again more interested in about how do we create this sort of unique hybrid sound. How do we get this feel, the carnatic, this rhythmic feel, create improvisational approach to creativity? How can we bring that to the drums? So that's sort of the thing that sort of continued to draw me to the hybrid kit. Well, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Amazing. We've been loving your presentation and some warm responses in the YouTube thing. People are loving it. And
well, for tuning in on a Tuesday evening, really appreciate that.
Yeah. So we are wrapping up, getting towards the end. I just wanted to ask you a little bit. This past month, for people who don't know, we've had this month-long focus on caste dynamics, particularly as they relate to South Indian percussion, and including we had, there was a couple films we watched, one kind of Bollywood or Mollywood movie, and a couple other documentaries, particularly about the Parai drum. And we're talking a lot about caste dynamics and politics as it comes into play in Indian classical music, and what is folk versus classical, and so just trying to incorporate that more into our regular programming as well, and um, particularly maybe you could talk a little bit about how that has come into play in your own learning and career, and also in your relationship with mridangam makers who maybe are predominantly of the lower caste. And I'll start myself as a, I would say my family is from upper caste thing. I had lots of privilege to go and learn, to go back to India and learn sitar, and that was it was very easy for me to be able to do that and throw aside my engineering that I was studying, and and so I just wanted you to comment on that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, thanks, for bringing that up, because I think it's a very, very important point. And again, kudos to BRM for for doing the series for the last month and really addressing this this huge issue, which has kind of been certainly been with us for a long time, and it's transformed, I think, actually over the generations. If you think about maybe what was happening in the 19th century, it appears it was quite different from what ended up happening in the 20th century with the creation of carnatic classical music, and and the public performances going from the courts and temples to the public concert halls. So a lot of things have transformed, and to the context that we're dealing with today in the Indian American diaspora. Definitely a huge huge topic, and I certainly think a lot about that, because my family also comes from the Tamil Brahmin sort of community, and one that is kind of the predominant community in the mridangam and Carnatic music in general, today among performers of Carnatic music. So there were certainly a lot of things that, of course, as a child, I was completely sort of unaware of these things, and I'm still sort of learning and gaining more knowledge and exposure to these topics. But a lot of things were available or accessible to me simply because of the cultural homogeneity. And it's again something you don't even think about it, because there's the community was so homogenous. But again, as I sort of started get sort of maturing, learning more about what's happening, thinking more, being able to think more about my sort of position in the diaspora, then you start realizing there's all sorts of other kind of people have no end to forms of discrimination. So the caste discrimination, as I learned, has been going on for a very long time in our field. And interestingly, so my guru's guru, so Sri Guru Vayadora, my teacher, his teacher was one of the most prominent mridangam players of the 20th century, Sri Payani Subramanya Pillai, and he comes he doesn't hail from the Brahmin community. So he was a musician who I think really broke down all sorts of musical and cultural barriers in Carnatic music, in terms of his caste, in terms of actually even cultural things, like he was a left-hander. So he was actually one of the first sort of prominent left-handed instrumentalists in Carnatic music. And this seems in our context today, it might seem left-handed, like what's the big deal? But in the world that they were living in, the left hand was considered inauspicious, and I think if you were a left-hander, it was just assumed that you wouldn't be an instrumentalist, and you certainly wouldn't be performing it. It's, maybe you're a singer, maybe you do something else, but there was no precedent for that really before him, in Carnatic music at least. So he actually opened the door to left-handers. Now we don't really think twice about it, but there are all sorts of forms of discrimination, and it's just a huge topic. I think something we have to be, I think, very cognizant about. I think it's going to be increasingly important for us to think about this as our art forms become increasingly globalized, international, diverse. There's still all sorts of sort of like lack of diversity, I think, especially in the Carnatic tradition, I can say, and things are hopefully slowly opening up, and certainly in the diaspora, hopefully our perspectives and what we're doing making it more accessible to people from different backgrounds. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think step one is sort of addressing, acknowledging um, how much more we need to do to diversify our community.
And can you talk a little bit about your mridangam? And the makers, of course, of the mridangams are often they're also sourcing these skins, uh, and which are unpure for the Brahmins, um, and building the mridangam, upkeep of the mridangam is a lot. There's a lot you have to maintain the mridangam, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, there's a lot. Again, just a lot of things. And as a kid, you don't even really sort of understand what's going on. I mean, just going from Kalamazoo, Michigan, to Chennai, India itself is such a huge, culture shock. As a kid, you're not even aware what's really going on. But I used to spend, a lot of time. My dad and I used to spend a lot of time with the mridangam makers, seeing what they do and how they do it. Because upkeep, as very correctly pointed out, upkeep of these instruments and tabla for that matter, is very complicated. And the mridangam in particular because it's connected. The traditional instrument has a strapping, leather strapping from side to side, so you can't really repair the instrument that easily without an artisan. You need an artisan to do any kind of major changes to the instrument. What I have here is sort of my own design. It's my own sort of patented design that's tunable, that separates the heads out, so this makes it a lot easier to tune and replace the heads. But the traditional instrument, which is what I was working with for most of my childhood, is impossible. Like you need an artisan, ideally, within 10 minutes of your house to be able to keep repairing this thing. So my dad and I used to go to the workshops there and just see, okay, what are they doing, and what can we do, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to maintain these instruments. And it was, really complicated. But yeah, my preferred, maker, who was also my teacher's preferred artisan. They come from they're not Hindu. They're Christian, and they come from a family of Christian mridanga makers. And Yeah, there of course, any number of sort of cultural kind of restrictions or challenges um, that I think a lot of players from the Brahmin community just you know kind of avoided. It's like, let's don't ask, don't tell. I mean, it was. I think a lot of players are not even aware of where the leathers are coming from, how they're sourced, how they're actually, sort of like handled. It's just like, no one wants to see how the sausage is made. They're like, just show me the instrument and I'll play, kind of thing. But there's so much that goes into it. The makers, the artisans are the backbone of the entire, industry. So certainly a huge, shout out to Johnson, his father, Gunashilam, and our makers, my teacher and I also have been working for a long time with a maker in Kerala, where my dad's and mom's side of come from originally. Parameshwaran and his son now are sort of continuing the tradition. Very sadly, Parameshwaran actually passed away of potentially COVID, just this past year. So at the age of I believe 59, so very very young. But he comes also from a lineage of mridanga makers, and yeah, they're absolutely the backbone of what we do. And I mean, I will say that my teacher, for example, does have I think a very close relationship with the artisans. They live very close by. They're obviously, he has them on speed dial kind of thing. But there are a lot of, these cultural issues that I think people just didn't talk about, didn't want to talk about, just kind of avoided it. And I think definitely in our generation, particularly here in the diaspora, where we're dealing with much, much, much more diverse sort of audiences and communities, of performers and listeners and audiences and presenters. I think it's really in our sort of interest and our responsibility to sort of learn more about where people are coming from, what kind of challenges people are facing, and what we can do to kind of find, a space and create a space that is comfortable and kind of harmonious for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for your great answer there. Um, we how about we end on with a little another musical moment? Is there something you want to share? But I think a great a little short thing would be a great way to end.
Yeah, sure. I'll maybe just play us out with a little hybrid kit solo here. And again, I want to thank BRM and Neil and Arun and all the folks, the BRM family, for inviting me. This has been really wonderful. I'm so glad I got to share some of the work I've been doing for the past several years. And again, this is a work in progress, so it's I'm constantly kind of developing and creating more and more. And I hope to share more, as it's developed. And yeah, thank you again for doing this, and thank you all for tuning in, and I hope everyone stays safe and healthy during COVID. And I hope we get to meet soon, Neil, in person, and get to resume the in-person live experience in the near future.
Yes, I hope we can jam someday soon.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. All right. Once again, we've been here at the BRM Weekly with Rohan Krishnamurthy. Thank you, Rohan. So great to have you. And next week, tune in. Samyukta Ranganathan, great vocalist, will be with us. And tune out. Sign up on our mailing list. We've got the Ragas Live Festival coming up, and the 19th of November. It'll be on the radio, as well as a few hours of it will be live in person at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn. Um, and we'll have our jam session also at the end of the month at Branded Saloon in Brooklyn. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, Rohan.
Thanks again, Neil.